Right now, I just want to please, if you'll help me in welcoming, we have Rod Smith, a friend and supporter of PHP at IBM. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's always a treat to be at ZenCon, and hopefully you had good lunches, but not that good a lunch. What I'm going to do today is talk about kind of where we're going on next generation workloads, and in particular from data and analytics, but also how it applies to solution developers, PHP in particular on this. A little bit what my team does. We're the headlights group in IBM. We're a small group, not very large. But we've done a lot over the years from, as you can see, from doing Java and analytics. We're also the team that commercialized the core Watson from research. But our mission is really to look kind of 12 to 18 months out on what's happening. And we're not part of a product team, so we talk to customers quite a bit. Excuse me, I've got a cold. So we're externally focused, and we hear what customers are interested in, and we start to work on these technologies, putting solutions together, open source technology standards in some cases. And then we have a JSTART team. And these are the folks that go out and work with customers. So when we get something we call kind of in cookie dough form, we're quick to go out and run it by customers. Did we hear right? Is this kind of what you were telling us? And hopefully we're right, and if not, we go back to the shop and work on it. If we are, then JSTART engagements start up. So we get to develop some metrics. How did it look next to the things they're doing today? Kind of a back of the envelope kind of calculation. So you can think of my team as someone that looks at new technology, here's the business problems that are going on, then how do we go out quickly and test it with customers? We also have kind of a tradition. We look at kind of competencies, technical competencies. And every few years we update them. And as you'll see from the team that we're going to do some demo today, we look for it being a broad team as well as a deep team. And I thought you'd be interested in a couple areas that we're doing from my team standpoint on competencies. Cloud composition is one. If you use Bluemix at all, the front end is called ACE, was the internal term for it. My team helped develop that and put it into GA production. Analytics is another area since we did Watson, but there's more things going on around that we think are interesting that I'll describe today. And then where this is going, because what we've heard from customers around kind of new data analytic engines and what that means as we look forward on this. So kind of keep that in mind for your own careers as you think about expanding out what you learned today and what you utilize. I like this chart. I've used it quite a bit, kind of put things in perspective. We see these computing waves in our industry, and this wasn't inclusive of everything out there, kind of the big ones that came to mind for me. And what's interesting is, especially as we've seen cloud computing, each one of these waves thought they were starting from a clean slate, didn't worry about the past history of where they were going, trying to use the new economics that they could use, that would make them successful in the future. But they also had unintended consequences. And that was always the fun part because it kind of drove the next generation of things that are going on with this. And you can read part of what these kind of spawned each time, from e-business to big data to cloud computing. But the buyers also changed a lot. And as you see, IT dominated in the platform days as we looked at mainframes. Client server was heavily the line of business types. Then we had the internet, lots of startups. And big data, cloud computing in particular, the audience continues to change as the IT department and CIO roles change. It's much more the line of business, and it will continue that way, I think, going forward. So new waves, as I'll discuss, really are aimed at how we look at the business problems the end user is grappling with in the future. Some of the insights we get from customers doing briefings and others, we see that customers looking at kind of these mobile social data applications. Integration's important. We know we don't walk away from that, but it's now kind of the flip point. We used to think about IT, the first thing was show me how you integrate in my current systems, my current middleware, and then show me the innovation parts. Line of business is different. Show me what you can do, what has impacted my business, then show me how you can integrate it into the IT department. So you've seen a number of things happen where IT looks to leverage and kind of, from a cloud computing standpoint, this balance point between their optimizations internally, how they drive efficiency, and business innovation. So cloud has become a big driver for them. How do they help the business? How do they become a better partner for them in developing new solutions? And there's lots of things going on around how businesses are looking at the meeting those expectations on big data, in particular around new approaches, looking at those, what line of businesses are going to be expected in the future. This is kind of an interesting chart, and I wanted to put it up front as I go through this. For developers, one of the things we've learned is, if you look at working with a business person, they usually start by telling stories. They don't have requirements like we'd normally see, and the stories aren't always a full puzzle picture. So my first bullet is, many of the questions we see today are these kind of open-ended business questions. They're not about the type of applications that have a repeatable result over and over again, asking the same question of your data over and over again. So this was one that was very tough to grapple with for a while. And we'll describe that as we start to talk about where we think applications are going. But it also said that when we're dealing with a business person, the more that they see of a solution as it unfolds, as you're working with them, the more they want, the more types of things they can think about. And they put it always in a business perspective, but it's taught us the fact that it's never complete. I think our definition of applications over time is going to change. The other part is when we think about analytics, where we've been in the past, excuse me, is, again, how do you help a business ask the right questions of their data through analytics and then be able to repeat that over and over again? It takes time. To do a BA solution might take 3 or 4 months to be able to figure out the right questions, and then you use schemas and analytics get set up. What businesses are really looking at is, well, close approximation is good enough for now. Closer is better and faster. That's hard for people who do analytics to grok. And it's been one that probably born on the web companies have done much, much better at this. So with those 2 or 3 things in mind, think about what innovations are happening around data and analytics that are helping build these new applications. So let me go through some of what's changing. The graphics there from Tom Davenport, there's an article in Harvard Business Review the end of last year on what he called Analytics 3.0. And part of the interesting article is to put things in perspective. Analytics really, as we've thought about them, regression analysis, other things, started in the 50s. And they haven't really changed much until big data got here in 2000. So 50 years of not much changing. And if you look in the first generation, lots of time spent on getting the data ready for analytics and not much in terms of analyzing. More descriptive than predictive in the first generation. And, analytics folks, mathematicians, weren't the most social people in the world. They got put in the back room in general and show us what you come up with, but, we really don't want to see you very much. Then you see kind of the 2.0 world. Big data starts to take a big front end to this. You're seeing the kind of contextual processing, meaning big data in a context. So whenever I hear people talk about big data, I like the term, but I also want to know how it's applied to a particular business context. And as I mentioned before, these things are always changing on it. Analytic modeling, instead of doing it in weeks or months became, can we do it in hours? And companies on the web figured out how to do that and continue to do that very well. And data scientists started to look towards open source, looking for tools, looking for ways they could make this and be more productive quicker on these things. And 3.0 is, kind of the next steps in that. Instead of thinking about analytics as a platform, what you're seeing is people want to build analytics right into their application, embed it. How can they utilize it to be more of a data-driven business on this? And those two things are factored in at the data economy piece. How do they use that information to produce new products, produce new offerings? And how do they do it in a way that they can analyze this information in almost a real-time basis, but also looking at historical data to look at anomalies, to look at events? How can they utilize that quickly and be able to use it in some good fashion for their business? We've seen with this, especially from technology side, the transformations, right? In 1.0 time frame, we had batch, interactive, and real time, and we had programming models specifically for those cases. So as we as engineers had to ask those questions up front, how much do you want this linked to decision making? Is it days, hours? Can I do it in batch? Do you need it queried on a regular basis? Do you need it in milliseconds? Those were the things that drove us to make a choice up front on programming models. If that changed, we had to go back to square one and go look at how we produce that solution again. As Hadoop and other technologies come along in kind of 2.0 time frame, you've seen this blending. First it was batch, Hadoop does that, but then people started to layer on top of Hadoop, Hive, looking at Pig, the other things from an interactive standpoint of Impala, and where this can go. And then, how do you look at other real-time pieces? And it was driven by, I think, the businesses looking at how they're going to be able to harness kind of data in motion, data at rest simultaneously on this. Probably the big push in the last year has been looking around more of a unified programming model. It's not just data at rest or data in motion, it's blending all that together very quickly and very seamlessly to create these solutions. So on the data side, what's changing? So I got analytics. Yes, I need to get to quicker time to value. I need a simpler programming model. I need data scientists who are going to be right at the desk with me as I work. And on the data side, Nathan Mars produced a paper a couple years back around Lambda architecture. And it turns out that this is driving a lot of what we're seeing with customers today. And we're still in the emerging technology phase of this, I think. But you're seeing that people are saying, well, I really do want to keep my data around for a long time, and I need to put it in a store, probably HDFS. And then I want to create, contextual views on that data. Maybe it's the, Hive type of thing, or I'm going to index the data that I want to work with at that point. But I don't want to destroy the original data, because I'm going to find different business contexts to use it in. And then they're also looking at the fact, well, maybe I want, as that information's coming in, it's a streaming information, and I want to send that right through from a real-time standpoint, because that's what the business needs. And timing here is variable. It could be milliseconds for real time, or it could be slower than that. So Nathan Mars did a nice job of not trying to layer it on different technologies, but more of the thought, we have to think of a cohesive way to look at data in the future and how we can handle it going forward in a way that businesses can utilize it. The other part, as we've seen around kind of the real-time basis, Google made an announcement earlier this year around cloud data flow. They've seen the same thing around unified programming models. How do they make it easier for all of us developers to be able to leverage data and analytics easier? And I think that's a major factor. I think data scientists are important to us, but as we incorporate analytics into our systems, then how do those roles change as we go on? Amazon looking at Kinesis. The project we like, we're going to show you some things around today, Spark, around the idea of more how do they layer on top of HDFS, some distributed cluster computing for kind of a real-time basis with it. All these types of things, though, have a common theme to them. How do you make the solution to developer more productive? In the early days, it was data-centric. How do I make accessing the data for analytics easier? Or it's about building the models from the analytics perspective, a BA expert. The flip has happened where people are focusing on solution. How do we make you guys successful? How do we do that? And I think that's a great way of looking at things better than trying to look at it through a lens of data or a lens of analytics. One of the other things that have come up that we've seen in the last year, and especially in the last 3 or 4 months, is notebook IDEs. These are, if you haven't seen them, iPi notebooks. Started out, I think, really in momentum probably around the 1st of 2013. And I think I saw the first drops come in December of 2012. Since then, they've grown significantly. And they've grown because it's, you know, if you weigh a way that business people and data scientists and solution developers can work together on these type of solutions. Go forward. You see in the last 2 years, about 67,000 notebooks up on GitHub. That's significant. A lot of them are for university uses. That's okay, because we know those graduates then are going to come out and want to use notebooks in other areas. This was a notebook, out of a notebook that one of my team guys created, looking at just the month of October on what they expected to see, and you can see kind of the growth pattern on it. So the takeaway point on part of this is, you know, the first time I saw notebooks and iPi notebooks, it was okay, it was fine, but it didn't kind of, you know, thrill me until I started to see where you could go with this besides just one language, and the types of things that were getting in for business people on leveraging notebooks as they looked at collaborations, as they brought, you know, other folks to the table with them. So, you know, as part of application development, one of the things that notebooks apply to is the business person. They like to see where they can put documentation in. They like to see the results of the data, the queries, or the data interactions or analytics that come back to them. And, you know, it's a collective team effort, but the new boss is the business person, and they're sitting at the table with you. We had 2 projects recently where the requirement was to start with notebooks because we were dealing with the business people on this. So that brings an interesting challenge. You know, the data scientists and developers, we're kind of used to getting in a room and, you know, figuring things out, and sometimes it's not pretty. The business leaders, those deep technical discussions are less interesting to them. They want to see results. So it's still important for us, but not nearly as important as building a good relationship with the business person at the table. And so think of these as, you know, think about how spreadsheets came about and personal productivity tools and how people collaborated. This is a new generation to go do those types of things. Iterative. What the business people like about notebooks, and I think data scientists as well, I can show you much of my progress I'm making, but you don't have to look at the code. You can look at what the results of the code are. The business person can get involved and say, well, I like that. Can you do these other things for me? So it's an exploratory piece and a collaborative piece that they, you know, that benefits everybody in the picture. And then we've had, you know, as we go through this, people thinking of kind of notebooks as a service. Lightweight kind of microservices that you can utilize these things and look from the solution standpoint for a broader integration. So business people, again, it's just not about my business area, it's broader than that. If I find things that can be leveraged, you know, how can I be a hero to the bigger company that I'm working in? So, you know, the other part of this is the new boss isn't the same as the old boss. These frowny faces is one that their expectations are very high and they don't want to hear about, you know, problems. They're looking at, you know, business from a particular context, and that changes all the time. They might look at what you're doing in a notebook and say, this is great, can we do something a little different? And the answer is yes. There's never a no answer to this. But notebooks and big data don't work so well together. Works great for kind of exploring algorithms and medium-sized data, but it can take a long time to run. And as I mentioned, these notebooks as a service, what we then start to hear from customers is, great microservice kind of thing. Can you guys, you know, really speed this up? Can you make it be more of a, you know, real-time speeds on it? Which, if you're dealing in any language, that becomes, you know, very challenging. Notebooks aren't made to do that. So in the past, what we would do is kind of look at this and say, well, all right, how do we take those algorithms and extract them and do a custom solution, all taking time to go do that. And that's one avenue to go down. Another one is since we're looking at notebooks, how can we slide other technology underneath it to do things more on that basis without affecting the way they interact with the business users, interact with the business on this. And that's one of the focuses we've had. And we'll describe this to you in a little more detail in a demo. So kind of picture the three areas here, kind of new data management, where people think about historical data, how they think about streaming data, how they utilize it. It's funny when I talk to customers, Andy and I were talking in an earlier session, when I sit down with the business people, it's not one or the other. They throw in how they want to think about streaming information and how they want to find anomalies or events in that. How they look at notebooks, because the audience now is not behind IT walls or someplace else. It's sitting at the table right there as they're thinking about continuous innovation from a business standpoint. And then how do you look at this new kind of wave of analytics, where it's about embedding that analytics, making it available to solution developers so you can work very quickly at this. So one of the projects we started recently is a project called Nitro. And if people have better project names, please pull us aside. We always have great time trying to figure out what we're going to name these things. But the idea was, iPi notebooks, a little too code intensive. How do we think about more of a document-oriented approach, but also how do you make it very lively and interactive for customers? And then how do you do it from looking at it through the eyes of the solution developer so you can take it and then leverage it in other applications? So it's not about this discovery model. That's interesting, important. It's more important is how do I show a business I can have value to them quickly on this? So with that, we're going to do a high wire act. We always like to show you live code. Gino Bustello's here from my emerging technology team, and he's going to take you through a demo, and hopefully it'll work.
Yes. Thank you, Rod. Thank you. Good afternoon, guys. So two key things that I want to reiterate from what Rod said, two key technologies, Spark and notebooks. So think about Spark as the data engine. That's where all our data processing, computation happens. It's scalable, it's fast, it's in-memory computation, and it has a great programming model. And then also think about notebooks. Notebooks is our portal into the data. It's the way that we interact, we enter our computation. It's a very flexible tool, very popular, data scientists love it. Now, both of these technologies have one main drawback, which is they're very much targeted to developers. So the set of skills required to take advantage of Spark and notebooks are very deep. So what we're trying to do with Project Nitro is allow to give this business user that wants answers now, that wants to interact with its data, that has the questions to the data, give this user the power of both Spark and the flexibility and the power of the tools like a notebook. So what I'm going to show you is first our thoughts around the next generation notebooks, and all this stuff is going to be running computation on top of Spark. So let's say that I'm a city manager, all right, and I'm trying to do some analysis around abandoned vehicles that get reported through my 311 request center. Right? So the first thing I need to do is find my data. And so we start here. This is our catalog. And our catalog is nothing more than a search engine that allows us to type our query and find data sets. Right? Once we find data sets, we're able to locate them and use them. Now, one of the big friction points of these sort of technologies that have a catalog is that you require them to download the data, maybe put it into a certain format, upload it to your tool so you can use it. Our thoughts with Nitro is that we want to be able to remove that friction point. So once I find the data piece that I need, in this case 311 requests about abandoned vehicles in Chicago, I can click on my favorite tool that I want to use. In this case, I'm going to use this tool called Live Sheets, which is our next generation notebooks ideas. So as you can see, it takes me to this environment. that allows me to document, build my story about data, give it a title, and build a story. But it also preloaded my environment with the data that I want to play with. Right? So I didn't have to think about CSV files, whether I have to dump it into a certain place in HDFS or in a file system or upload it. It's just there. I can look at my data set. There's a variety of columns here, but I'm going to actually focus on 3 columns. You can see there's a status column for the report. These are all, each row represents a report, a 311 call about abandoned vehicles. There's also the make and model of the vehicle and the vehicle color. Right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to get an idea of how many reports are coming in. So the total report count is, at any point, I can invoke my code editing environment. And this is a moment in time snapshot of this tool. A lot of this is going to become more and more interactive as we move along. But the idea here is that very simple scripting allows me to take control of my data and ask it questions. So in this case, I'm going to count how many records I have. So I'm going to count. I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to show that data set. Right? And I'm executing that. And that's actually crunching the numbers about how many records, counting. It's all happening in Spark, and I get a number back. That's great. Now, how about if I want to show a little bit about that status column? What are the different status of the individual reports? Again, I could come here and not do that. There you go. I can use my data set, called data set 1. Remember, data set 1 is my 311 calls about abandoned vehicles. I'm going to do a count by. And this time I'm going to do a count by the status column. And then I'm going to, again, give it a name. Call it status. And I'm going to show. Right? And now that's going to compute an aggregation query around that column and give me back the results. And this is great because now I'm looking at my data through that column, and I can inspect and find out things that I don't really care about. And remember, I'm the business user. I want to play and understand my data. And I realize, you know what, I don't care about completed duplicates. I want to take those out of my data set. So I can interact with this visualization. And it asks me, what do you want to do with that selection? Well, I want to trash it. I don't want it. And it goes and filters that out of the data set. It updates. And as you can see, my data updated, my counts updated, and my visualization updated. And so I'm getting feedback, and I'm transforming the data into the data that I really want. So now let's say that now I've only wanted completed and open reports. Let's focus a little bit on the vehicle make and model. And what's interesting there, finding out what vehicle make and model are more likely to get abandoned in Chicago. And so I'm going to actually go here and re-edit my bubble chart here. And I'm going to enter vehicle make and model as my count by. And I'm going to execute that. And now I immediately get a new representation of my data. I'm looking at it through the make and models. I say, aha, you know, I have some empty. Some people did not enter the make. There's unlisted makes. Again, I can select those and remove them from my data set. My counts get updated. My data gets updated. And I can also look at it in a different way. Let's look at it as a bar chart. And that's great. So now we've determined that there's a lot of Chevys and Fords that get abandoned in Chicago. The next piece is, what if I want to compare? What if I want to bring another city and compare how my city is doing with other cities? So why can't we compare with San Francisco? All right, and I type, I'm going to start comparing with San Francisco. And while I'm doing that and I'm typing my text, why not do searches on this catalog and figure out what are the data sets make sense to bring in? So that's what just happened. As I was typing, the catalog was queried again, and there's some data sets that mention San Francisco, and lo and behold, there's a data set for abandoned vehicles in San Francisco. So I can pull that data set in, and now I got the same 311 calls, but from San Francisco. In this case, I can again do another visualization. So I'm going to use, in this case, that's called data set 2. It's the second data set I bring in. I'm going to do a count by model. And then I'm going to name it. And then I'm going to show. And now I get the data shown for the city of San Francisco. I actually don't want empty, so I can, again, delete those. Everything gets updated. But now let's compare it. And so I can show it as a chart. And you know, the story here in San Francisco is a little bit different. Toyotas are more likely to get abandoned. And for some reason, people are abandoning BMWs. Don't ask me why. So hopefully I showed you there the power of removing some of the friction points around doing data analytics and how the business user can take a tool like this and be able to take control of its data. Simple loading of the data, interactions with visualizations, very simple scripting that they can add. But they can build their story, and ultimately they can build documents like this that tell a whole set of information, number of cases, how they compare open to close and to complete it, the different models, the pivot. You can pivot on columns and see how they relate for a different value and compare with other cities and go and so on. So you're building this story that you can share. It has your code in it. It has your steps. You can reproduce it. So I've generated some data here. Now the other side of the picture that Rod talked about is how do I take this data and I'll make it part of my business solutions, right? So I want to be able to use these data sets and build applications on top of it, bringing the application world and the data world together. So for that, I'm going to very quickly just show you, as a comparison, an IPython notebook. This is the state of the art in notebooks. One of the most known notebook user front ends is the IPython notebook. And as you can tell in comparison, it's very code heavy, but it's still very powerful and flexible, and we like to support this tool. And this tool is connecting to the same backend that that previous tool was connecting to, and you're able to write more verbose code and more power in terms of coding, but it still is a tool that's more geared to a data scientist and a developer, not a business user. I mean, you can still do visualizations, etc. But I want you to really focus on this particular variable that I've created here, group by color and model. So I've done some work in this notebook, and I've compiled this data that basically what it does a group by color and model, and then gives me the count. So now from this data set, I can tell the different combinations of color and models that usually happen in abandoned vehicle reports. But how do I take that data and integrate it into my application? So we built this key piece of technology called a data service that basically treats one of those variables as a RESTful endpoint. So, I mean, this is very verbose and cryptic, but really you have the location of this variable, and when you execute that, you get JSON back. So now it's very easy to integrate, for example, a PHP application into this world by interacting with the RESTful environment. I can even query that SQL-like, and it responds, and it's actually doing the computation in the Spark environment. So with that in mind, we actually very quickly put together a PHP application that one of the main things that it does is communicates to that RDD server. We call it an RDD server, and finds the piece of data that we care about. And we can actually take that and create new visualizations. Now think about this as part of your applications, a plugin to some blogging tool, etc. This is what we want to do, is bring together the data world and the application world. That's a demonstration.
Leave it there. That's good. So a couple things that I wanted to go over, and it's great it worked. So thank you for applauding Gino. Let's back up one. One of the things that we've learned, and we're talking about it earlier too. Today in analytics, there's religion around languages. Python is one, R is another. So one of the things we've been concentrating on, and we'll do in a future release, is these notebooks should be multi-language. Work in the language you want to work in. and the cells open up and code in them and be able to utilize it at that standpoint. So it shouldn't be towers as we've seen in the past on it. The second part is that we think that as we put this together, and Gino showed you catalog, for example, it's more of a registry in a lot of cases that we think can be utilized in lots of different ways on it. And as we showed you with DSL, one language, we think this can open up. And that's important because we'll have developers who want to work in different languages. We'll have the Visual Basic crowd coming and looking at simpler DSLs to be able to work with for particular types of solutions. And we think this offers a nice avenue to go with. The other part we like is Spark works on HDFS nicely. It plays nice on that front. And so now I've got ways that I have data from a HDFS standpoint that's always there. Spark, when Gino mentioned RDDs, are called residual data sets. Yeah, that's right. Resilient, I always say residual. Resilient data sets. And think of that as a way that it can, makes its own compute context. That's nice because now I'm not working on that data. I'm working in memory. Spark does nice caching on these things. And then I can look at it from a solution standpoint where I want to go in terms of integration. So we think this has got a lot of legs underneath it at that point. I'm going to stop there, but I think that what we're finding is as the ball moves, one more time, the customers we're going to be dealing with in the future are going to be business people. And the more we do that, the more they're going to want to be able to explore data, create business processes, modify business processes, and create, if you will, more dynamic dashboards and others, and do it quickly. And time to value is going to be critical. We see things on the stock market and others, but as we go forward, it's going to be even more dramatic on this. Kind of big data notebooks seems to start to go together, and it's interesting to us that this is coming up, and it's nice. From the other aspect, as Gino showed you, we don't have to show a lot of technology through, and I think that's an important factor. We want flexibility as technologists and as developers underneath to make the right decisions of run times, execution engines, how do we do this? And they shouldn't be made up front as you think about the development side of it. That's not a question we should be asking a business person is when, what's the time frame you need to use this in seconds, milliseconds, hours? I mean, they don't know. They just can't answer those things. For developers, it's going to be context. Business context, making sure that you understand and we understand that there's always this sliding window. Well, one of the interesting stories that I got was when I talked to a business person one day about a solution he wanted. We came back about 3 weeks later with something we thought met his needs, kind of with a good communication vehicles, and his response was, what were you here for 3 weeks ago? I mean, they kind of forgot. And he or she's got a lot on their minds. So the faster I can turn around as a business person or as a developer and get a solution, a partial solution up to see if I'm hitting the right value proposition, the better. I need to develop face time with customers. And the more you can do that, the faster, the better on this. And especially for the PHP community. You guys have been on the forefront of creating solutions and end users from the beginning. And that's an important dimension to this. And I think as data comes along, better data services, better analytic services, the marriage with that in PHP is going to be a very good one. So with that, I appreciate your time today, and thank you very much.